The rare aura only true empaths carry. Carl Jung once said, "Your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart." In today's journey on spiritual wisdom, we're exploring a hidden truth about the rare aura. Only true empaths carry an energy born not just from sensitivity, but from deep transformation. This is more than a gift. It's a soul's journey through pain, healing, and awakening. As you listen, think about how these insights could guide your own spiritual growth and happiness. Do you recognize these qualities within yourself or in someone you know? Share your thoughts in the comments, because your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. 1. The rare empathic aura is born from wounds transformed into perception. True empathy is rarely born from a life of comfort. It is often forged in the quiet crucible of hardship, when the soul has been tested, wounded, and reshaped by pain. Many who carry this rare empathic aura were once children who learned to survive by listening not only to words, but to the invisible tremors beneath them. They developed an instinctive sensitivity, reading the emotional climate of a room before a single sentence was spoken, scanning for shifts in tone, expression, or energy that others would overlook. This heightened awareness was not a gift freely given. It was an adaptation, a survival mechanism, a way for the soul to protect itself in an unpredictable or unsafe world. Over time, what began as vigilance transformed into a profound ability to connect, to feel, and to understand. It became the intuitive perception that allows an empath to stand in the presence of another's pain and see it without turning away. This rare aura is not just an emotional skill. It is an energy the soul radiates, a frequency that others sense before a single word is exchanged. Carl Jung would have described it as the unconscious projecting itself outward, shaped by the intricate weave of past wounds, lessons, and healing. Those who encounter a true empath often feel an almost magnetic pull, a sense of safety that compels them to open up, to speak truths they have buried deep. What they do not realize is that this trust is born from the empath's own history of navigating vulnerability. The empath's presence says, "Without words, I have been where you are. I understand." And yet, this extraordinary sensitivity carries a hidden cost. Because the empath feels so deeply, they are also more susceptible to emotional exhaustion, to absorbing the pain of others, and to being drained by those who mistake their openness for endless availability. To carry such an aura is to walk a delicate path between openness and self-preservation. It means living with a heart that can stretch to hold the grief of others, yet learning to wrap that heart in invisible armor when necessary. It is to know that your soul's light is not accidental. It is hard-won, earned through nights of solitude where you pieced yourself back together without anyone noticing. Through years of being unseen, yet learning to see yourself clearly. Through battles fought in silence that no one applauded, but that changed you forever. This is the path of the wounded healer, a figure Jung often spoke of, whose own wounds become the source of their power to heal others. Like Chiron, the wise centaur of myth, who could mend the pain of all but his own, the empath must learn that self-care is not selfish. It is the wellspring from which their gift flows. Every scar carried within the soul becomes a thread in the tapestry of their wisdom. Each moment of pain alchemizes into a deeper capacity to understand, to forgive, to love without judgment. And in this way, the empath moves through the world as both a sanctuary and a mirror reflecting back to others their own hidden truths, while quietly holding the knowledge that their own journey has been the greatest teacher. This is the essence of the rare aura, not a fragile sensitivity, but an unshakable strength disguised as gentleness, a living testament that suffering can be transformed into sight, and that the deepest wounds can give rise to the most luminous light. Have you ever felt your deepest pain transform into a gift of intuition? If so, share your experience in the comments so others can learn from your journey. If not, comment, "I will awaken." And let's walk this path of empathy and awareness together. 2. Empathy is both a gift and a warning. Empathy, as Carl Jung profoundly understood, is not merely a pleasant quality or a gentle kindness. It is a rare and powerful force that can bring light to the darkest places while also pulling you into the depths of human suffering if you do not learn to guard it. It is both a blessing and a warning, for it attracts both the warmth of human connection and the heavy shadows of others' pain. Those who carry this rare aura often find that people are drawn to them instinctively. Strangers feel safe sharing their secrets. Loved ones seek them out for comfort, and even in silence, they are felt as a calming, grounding presence. Yet beneath this gift lies a truth Jung called the wounded healer archetype. The deep sensitivity of the empath is often born from their own soul's pain, carved by life's trials into channels that allow them to perceive what others cannot. This heightened awareness is extraordinary, but without boundaries, it becomes a doorway through which the weight of the world can flood in, exhausting the body, clouding the mind, and erasing the self until the empath can no longer distinguish between their own emotions and those they have absorbed from others. In modern life, this truth plays out quietly yet powerfully. You might be the friend who always answers late-night calls, the coworker who notices when someone is silently struggling, or the partner who senses a shift in mood before a word is spoken. People come to you because they feel understood. Yet if you are not careful, the constant giving begins to drain your life force. Carl Jung's teaching on individuation, the journey toward becoming your true, whole self, reminds us that even the most open heart must learn to remain rooted. For an empath, individuation means holding space for another's pain without letting it spill over into your own soul, staying compassionate while protecting the sacred center of your being. In today's connected world, where news feeds overflow with tragedy, injustice, and hidden cries for help, the empath's ability to feel deeply can turn into chronic emotional fatigue. The danger is subtle but real. You may find yourself feeling responsible for suffering you did not cause, carrying burdens that were never yours to bear, and silently sacrificing your own well-being in the name of compassion. There was once a woman I knew, a nurse in an overcrowded urban hospital, whose patients loved her for her warmth and attentiveness. She remembered birthdays, stayed long after her shifts to comfort grieving families, and carried every story in her heart. But at night, she lay awake replaying their pain, unable to release it. Her health began to falter, and joy drained from her life. Only when she learned to set emotional boundaries to close her inner door after a day of service did she reclaim her strength. She discovered that caring for others did not mean abandoning herself, and that sometimes the most loving act is to step back so you can keep showing up tomorrow. This is the paradox of empathy. To keep your light burning, you must sometimes shield it from the wind. Your rare aura is a gift to the world, but as Carl Jung warned, what makes you unique can also undo you if you lack self-awareness. Your sensitivity is not meant to be an unguarded channel for every passing emotion, but a finely tuned compass, guiding you toward where your presence is needed most while keeping your own soul nourished. Boundaries are not walls that shut people out. They are the structures that protect the sacred space from which your empathy flows. When you honor your own limits, you preserve the purity of your gift. When you respect your own needs, you ensure that your empathy remains a source of healing rather than harm. The truest power of your rare aura lies not just in your ability to feel, but in your wisdom to know what is yours to carry and what is not. Comment below, "I protect my energy," to affirm your commitment to honoring your empathy while keeping healthy boundaries. 3. The conscious empath protects their energy. A conscious empath understands that their emotional and spiritual energy is sacred, and protecting it is not just a choice, but a necessity for living in alignment with their soul. Boundaries are not rigid walls meant to isolate, but living gates you control, opening to what nourishes you and closing to what drains you. Without them, the empath's deep well of compassion becomes a target for those who take without giving, leaving the empath exhausted, resentful, and disconnected from themselves. Carl Jung's wisdom echoes here. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This is why shadow work becomes a vital practice. It is the path to reclaiming the suppressed instincts that keep you whole, like self-preservation, discernment, and even the often misunderstood force of healthy anger. For too long, many empaths have been conditioned to see anger as something shameful, something that must be buried. But in truth, healthy anger is a guardian of your boundaries, the inner voice that rises when your spirit is being violated or your energy misused. To integrate this side of yourself means you can say no without guilt, withdraw without apology, and stand in your truth without hostility, knowing that you are not here to carry every burden or heal every wound you encounter. Your energy is like a sacred garden, one that must be tended with intention. You do not allow careless feet to trample its soil, nor do you scatter its seeds on barren ground in the hope that something will grow. You nourish it, you cultivate it, and you understand that when it blooms, the beauty and fragrance you share with others come from abundance, not sacrifice. This awareness sharpens your ability to recognize the quiet leaks of energy, the draining conversations, the relationships built on imbalance, the constant accessibility that leaves no time for solitude, the self-neglect disguised as generosity. Spiritual maturity means seeing that love without boundaries is not pure love, but self-abandonment in disguise. When you honor your limits, you give from a place of strength rather than depletion, and your compassion gains depth because it is rooted in self-respect. The conscious empath knows that protecting their energy is not an act of selfishness, but a sacred responsibility. They understand that their gift of sensitivity is a finely tuned instrument, one that can heal, inspire, and transform, but only when it is cared for. As Jung said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." By looking inward, you awaken to the truth that you are not here to be consumed by the needs of others, but to channel your empathy with intention, offering it where it will truly make a difference. This is how your rare aura becomes more than just a passive glow. It becomes a force that illuminates, protects, and elevates not only those who receive it, but also the soul that carries it. 4. Your aura changes with your inner state. Your aura is a living reflection of your soul's condition, and it silently communicates to the world around you in ways that words never could. When your soul is grounded, integrated, and whole, your energy becomes steady, radiant, and magnetic, naturally drawing toward you people who are ready to heal, grow, and step into deeper truth. They are not attracted to you because of what you do, but because of who you are at the deepest level. A presence that feels like home, a sanctuary in a chaotic world. Carl Jung once said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." In this way, your wholeness becomes a silent catalyst for transformation, and others feel it without needing you to explain. But when your soul is fragmented, when parts of you remain wounded, unresolved, or disconnected from your own center, your aura will carry that fracture into every interaction. The once clear and grounded energy becomes scattered, like a mirror cracked into pieces. And instead of harmony, you may attract chaos, conflict, or projection. People who have not faced their own shadows may use you as a screen to project their pain, blame, or confusion, turning you into a character in their unresolved story. This is the double-edged truth of being an empath. You cannot hide the frequency you radiate, because your energy tells the truth your words cannot mask. The rare aura only true empaths carry is not merely a gift. It is the result of deep spiritual work, of walking through darkness and returning with light in your hands. It is shaped by self-awareness, shadow integration, and the slow, deliberate process of gathering the fragmented pieces of your soul that life's heartbreaks and betrayals have scattered. Each time you choose to come back to yourself instead of abandoning yourself. Each time you breathe into stillness instead of reacting in haste. Each time you remember your worth instead of seeking it outside. You polish the mirror of your aura so it reflects truth rather than distortion. This is why empaths who have done their inner work seem magnetic without trying. Their energy feels safe, their presence soothes, and their words carry weight because they are rooted in lived experience. Jung's insight rings true here. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. If you neglect your inner world, chaos will find you in the form of relationships, events, and patterns that mirror your own fragmentation. But when you honor your soul, tend to your wounds, and remain rooted in your truth, your aura becomes unshakable, a lighthouse that guides without chasing, a calm harbor in any storm. The rare aura of the true empath is, in the end, the visible proof of a soul that has embraced its shadows, claimed its light, and now radiates both in harmony, offering silent healing to those who are ready to receive it. If this message resonates with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your reflections in the comments below. Let's keep uncovering the deeper truths of our energy together. 5. The true purpose is transformation, not self-sacrifice. Carl Jung once said, Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people. And this truth reaches into the very essence of what it means to be a true empath. The highest purpose of empathy has never been about losing yourself in someone else's suffering or carrying their burdens until you collapse under the weight. It is about transformation, the kind of deep inner shift where sensitivity matures into wisdom, discernment, and the ability to hold space for another person's pain without becoming consumed by it. There is a quiet power in being able to sit with someone in their struggle without letting it seep into your bones, in being able to witness their storm without being swept away. Too often, people equate love with self-sacrifice, thinking that to prove they care, they must give endlessly, fix endlessly, and absorb endlessly. But over time, this erodes the soul and leaves even the most compassionate heart running on empty. I once knew a woman whose generosity knew no bounds. She answered late-night calls, gave money she could not spare, rearranged her life to solve others' crises, and never once paused to ask herself if she had anything left to give. For years, she believed this was what it meant to love. But slowly, she began to notice the signs. Her health faltered, her joy dimmed, her spark faded. The very light that had drawn people to her began to disappear. Only when she learned to set boundaries, not as walls to shut people out, but as sacred lines to protect her own soul, did her empathy transform into something more powerful. She discovered she could still care deeply, still be present in the darkest moments, but she no longer absorbed chaos like a sponge. She became a steady anchor in the storm rather than a fellow passenger on a sinking ship. This is the essence of Carl Jung's deeper truth. The rare aura of a true empath is not defined by how much pain they can hold, but by the ability to remain rooted, present, and whole while walking alongside another's suffering. In a world that glorifies constant availability, hustle, and the idea that saying yes to everyone is a virtue, it is revolutionary to choose discernment over depletion. Social media tells us to always be there and never say no. But these mantras, without balance, only lead to burnout, resentment, and a slow erosion of self. Real love is not about drowning with someone. It is about keeping your own head above water so you can help them find the shore. When empathy evolves into wisdom, it becomes sustainable. It becomes a gift that heals rather than drains. This is what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming whole, integrating your light and your shadow so that your compassion is no longer tangled with the need to rescue. You understand that your role is not to absorb every wound, but to create a space where others can feel safe enough to heal themselves. You stop being an emotional martyr and instead become a beacon, offering light without extinguishing your own flame. The rare aura you carry is not the mark of a soul that has been consumed by others, but of one that has been refined by its own transformation. A soul that has learned to love without losing itself. 6. You are not here to fix everyone. You are not here to fix everyone, no matter how deeply your heart aches to do so. Because the role of a conscious empath is not to throw yourself into every storm, but to stand as a lighthouse, steady, unshaken, and unmovable, guiding those who are ready to find their own way. Like a flame that continues to burn, even in the fiercest wind, your spiritual purpose is to illuminate the path, not to absorb every shadow or carry the weight of every soul's darkness. Carl Jung once said, The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And for you, this means embodying your light so fully that you do not have to chase anyone into the depths. They will see your glow and choose for themselves whether to walk toward it. The rare aura you carry as a true empath was not formed by endlessly giving or rescuing, but by transmuting your own wounds into wisdom, your pain into power, and your compassion into a presence so grounded that it naturally inspires without needing to control. Too often, empaths confuse their spiritual calling with a duty to save everyone, forgetting that even the strongest swimmer will drown if they try to pull too many undercurrents to shore. Your gift is not measured by how much suffering you can endure, but by how deeply you can remain anchored in your truth while still radiating love. A lighthouse does not leap into the waves. It remains rooted, letting its beam pierce the fog, and in doing so, it becomes the very thing that ships depend on to navigate safely. When you stay grounded in your own energy, aligned with your highest self, you become that guiding light not through force, but through the undeniable pull of your authenticity. Yet the pull to overextend is powerful, because the pain of the world feels personal to a sensitive soul. Every cry for help seems to demand your immediate response. Every wound you witness feels like a wound you must heal. But as Rumi reminds us, do not get lost in your pain. Know that one day, your pain will become your cure. You are not the cure for everyone. You are the reminder that healing is possible. By protecting your energy, you are not being selfish. You are safeguarding the very source of your light. Spiritual strength grows not from draining yourself for others, but from cultivating an inner reservoir so deep that your light cannot be dimmed. Like the sun, you do not need to apologize for setting when it is time to rest, nor do you need to explain why you cannot stand in the storm for someone unwilling to swim. Boundaries are not walls. They are lighthouses' foundations, ensuring the tower stands for decades instead of crumbling after one storm. When you honor your limits, you teach others to honor theirs. You show that true love is not rescuing someone from their path, but respecting their right to walk it. The rare aura of a true empath is not defined by constant sacrifice, but by radiant being a steady, quiet light that guides without chasing, heals without absorbing, and inspires without losing itself. You remain in your place of power, tending to your own flame, knowing that those meant to find your light will see it not because you entered their chaos, but because you stayed anchored in your truth, unshaken, unwavering, and whole. Comment: I agree. If you believe your role is to guide through presence, not by carrying every burden, or I don't think so, if you see it differently. 7. Wholeness is the highest expression of empathy. Wholeness is the highest and most complete expression of empathy, a state where the soul stops rejecting or hiding its broken parts and instead welcomes every fragment into a unified, harmonious self. True empathy does not grow from a life shielded from hardship. It is born in the deep valleys of experience, where both the light and the shadow of the human heart are faced without denial. The rare aura that true empaths carry is not a fragile glow that comes from innocence. It is a steady, unwavering presence, forged in the fires of loss, heartbreak, and disappointment. They have walked through seasons where their trust was betrayed, where their kindness was misunderstood, and where their love was taken for granted. And yet, they refused to let those wounds harden them into cynicism. Instead, they turned pain into wisdom, learning to stand as a clear, compassionate force without losing themselves in the storms of others. They understand, as Carl Jung once said, that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. They do not run from their own darkness. They turn toward it, sit with it, and listen until it reveals its hidden truth. In doing so, they strip it of its power to control them. This integration transforms their empathy from a fragile sensitivity into a grounded, unshakable presence. They can step into another person's chaos and remain steady because they have already learned to navigate their own. They no longer confuse compassion with self-sacrifice. They know that holding space for someone does not mean drowning in their pain. Just as a tree becomes strong, not because it has been spared the wind, but because it has endured countless storms, the empath's soul gains its depth and resilience from uniting opposites, light and shadow, wounds and wisdom, fragility and strength. Their presence carries a quiet weight, a truth you can feel in the way they look at you, listen to you, and see beyond your words. When they comfort you, it is not with shallow platitudes, but with the assurance of someone who has been where you are and knows the road through it. Their compassion is not pity, it is connection. In their wholeness, they remind others that they too can reclaim the parts of themselves they have hidden out of shame or fear. They show that the soul does not need to be perfect to be powerful, and that our shadow, when embraced, becomes an unexpected source of strength. The aura they carry is unlike any other, not the flicker of a candle easily snuffed out, but the steady, guiding light of a lantern that has burned through countless nights. They embody the truth that wholeness is not the absence of pain, but the alchemy of transforming it into something sacred. And in doing so, they become living proof that the most radiant beauty a soul can possess is born from the courage to integrate every part of itself. If this message resonates with your soul today, comment below. I embrace my wholeness, and I honor both my light and shadow. And so, the rare aura of a true empath is not merely a gentle gift, but a profound transformation born from pain, turned into deep perception, a spiritual signature that shapes every connection you make. If this message has touched your heart or opened your eyes, I invite you to keep walking this path of awareness with us. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you won't miss any of our upcoming journeys into the depths of the soul and the mysteries of human nature. You've been doing too much. Here's what happens when you stop. In the midst of movement and chaos, keep stillness inside of you. These words by Deepak Chopra echo the timeless truth Carl Jung once uncovered, that doing more isn't always the answer sometimes. Your soul is just asking you to let go. At Spiritual Wisdom, today's video dives into the transformative power of surrender. What if your next breakthrough isn't in pushing harder, but in pausing deeper? As you listen, consider how these principles could reshape your daily life, your stress, your healing, your happiness. Have you ever experienced peace by doing less? Share your story in the comments below, and let's explore this spiritual awakening together. 1. Doing too much blocks inner growth. Carl Jung believed that when you are constantly doing, striving, and chasing outcomes, you are not living from your soul, but from your ego's fear of stillness and loss of control. In our modern world, the obsession with productivity has become a mask for deeper avoidance. We run faster, we push harder, we fill every space with action, not because we are aligned, but because we are terrified of what might surface in the silence. And yet, it is in that very silence that the soul begins to speak. It speaks not through loud declarations, but through subtle inner shifts, through dreams, through deep knowing, through the ache you feel when you're far from your true path. When you are constantly doing too much, you block the wisdom of the unconscious. You override your intuition, and you remain trapped in loops that keep you externally busy but internally disconnected. This is the paradox Jung uncovered. The more you force life, the more it resists you, not because you're wrong, but because the soul doesn't evolve through force. It evolves through surrender. Letting go isn't a weakness. It's the bravest thing your nervous system can do. It's the moment your inner world unclenches. And in that release, space is made for real growth to happen. Not the kind of growth that pleases others, but the kind that brings you home to yourself. Jung taught that the unconscious is the gateway to transformation, but you cannot hear its voice if you're always chasing. Sometimes the reason you feel stuck isn't because you're not doing enough. It's because you've done too much for too long without listening. When you stop micromanaging the outcomes and allow space for grace, you begin to realign with your own natural rhythm. You stop performing for validation and start living in alignment. You stop trying to prove your worth and start honoring your soul. And this is when the true alchemy begins, when the external noise fades and the internal wisdom rises. The moment you stop trying to control life is the moment you remember that the soul was never meant to be caged by the ego's demands. It was meant to lead. Are you ready to stop striving and start listening to your inner truth? If so, comment below. I will surrender to affirm your commitment to releasing control and allowing true spiritual growth to unfold. 2. Stillness is not laziness. It's alignment. Stillness is not laziness. It's alignment. And Carl Jung understood this truth far deeper than most of us are ever taught to see. In a world that idolizes hustle and glorifies exhaustion, we've been tricked into thinking that our worth is tied to our productivity. We are constantly doing, achieving, managing, fixing, believing that if we just keep moving, we'll eventually arrive at peace. But what if peace isn't something you chase? What if peace is something you remember, something you return to, and that return only begins when you finally stop running? Jung emphasized the concept of Wu Wei, the Taoist principle of effortless action, not doing nothing, but doing with flow, with inner alignment, without resistance. This doesn't mean passivity. It means trusting that the soul has its own intelligence, its own timing, and when we stop interfering, life often unfolds in the most extraordinary ways. You might be carrying too much right now: responsibilities, guilt, expectations, pressure to be everything for everyone. And you might have confused that heaviness with purpose. But Carl Jung taught that when we become overly identified with the ego's need to act, to control, to solve, we lose access to the voice of the unconscious, the deeper, wiser part of us that speaks not in words, but in symbols, sensations, and stillness. In silence, the soul surfaces. In pause, insight appears. One modern example that echoes Jung's teachings is the growing number of people today who find themselves on the edge of burnout, despite having everything they thought they wanted. They followed the formula, worked hard, stayed busy, ticked all the boxes, but feel hollow inside. That hollowness is not failure. It's the soul's rebellion. It's life saying, stop doing so much and start listening again. I once met a man in his early 40s who had spent 2 decades building a successful business. From the outside, he had it all. But internally, he was crumbling. Anxiety attacks, sleepless nights, a constant sense of dread he couldn't explain. He told me that the moment things began to shift wasn't when he hired more staff or fixed his schedule. It was when he took 2 weeks off and sat by the ocean, doing absolutely nothing. At first, he felt worthless. But by the end, he said it was like hearing his soul for the first time in 20 years. Jung would have said that he finally allowed the unconscious to breathe. He stopped being a machine and remembered he was a human being, a soul with depth, not just a mind with a to-do list. Stillness, then, is not an escape from life. It is life in its truest form. It's the sacred threshold where you stop reacting and start feeling, where you stop pushing and start flowing, where you stop seeking approval and finally hear your own voice again. Carl Jung believed that the unconscious is not some passive space. It is the fertile soil of transformation. But we can't access that soil if we're constantly walking on top of it. We have to be still long enough for the roots of insight to grow. The most powerful shifts in your spiritual and emotional life don't come when you're forcing change. They come when you surrender to something deeper, something ancient inside you that already knows the way. So if you feel exhausted, not just in body, but in soul, that's not a weakness. That's a signal. That's your system begging for alignment. You've been doing too much, not too little. And your healing doesn't begin with more effort. It begins with stillness. When you finally let go, you don't fall apart. You fall into place. 3. Ego versus self. Forcing versus flow. The ego is always in a rush. It wants results, recognition, and control. It chases goals that look impressive, but feel empty, pushing you to prove your worth by how much you do, how fast you move, and how perfect you appear. But Carl Jung reminded us that this constant doing is not power. It's a mask for fear. The ego craves speed, but the self, which Jung saw as the whole of your psyche, including the unconscious and spiritual dimensions, moves with intention, not urgency. It doesn't strive to dominate. It longs to integrate. It seeks truth, not applause. And while the ego screams through endless activity, the self speaks in silence, in the quiet pause between moments, where the soul begins to stir and healing begins to take root. When you live through ego, life becomes a performance. You're always acting, striving, reaching, but never arriving. You feel disconnected, like something essential is missing, even when everything on the outside appears successful. That's because the ego measures growth by how far you've gone, but the self asks how deeply you've come home to yourself. As long as you're caught in this performance, your spiritual path becomes distorted. You confuse movement with progress, and you forget how to listen. Jung said, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." And that awakening doesn't happen through force, it happens through flow. Letting go isn't about giving up. It's about remembering that the truest parts of you emerge not when you push harder, but when you surrender deeper. Like nature, your soul operates on divine timing. No flower blooms all year. There's a sacred rhythm to everything real, and forcing it only tears the roots. The deeper spiritual transformation comes when you stop grasping for certainty and start embracing presence. Doing less doesn't mean you're lazy. It means you're aligned. Stillness is not weakness. It's where your energy refines, where your intuition sharpens, and where your real power begins to rise. The modern world rewards the hustle, but your soul is calling for stillness. The path forward is not about becoming more, but about unbecoming what you're not. When you finally let go of the ego's expectations, you stop chasing and start attracting. You become magnetic, not because you're striving, but because you're rooted. As Rumi said, try not to resist the changes that come your way. Instead, let life live through you. The moment you stop trying to control everything is the moment you make room for your spiritual self to lead. And that's where true transformation begins. Have you ever paused to notice whether you're living from your ego or your true self? If so, share your insights in the comments below. We'd love to hear your experience. If not, comment, "I choose flow," to begin aligning with the deeper wisdom within. Let's grow together on this spiritual path toward authenticity and transformation. 4. Shadow work happens when you pause. Stillness is not a sign of weakness, failure, or laziness. It is the soul's invitation to finally be heard beneath the noise. In a world obsessed with action, productivity, and constant motion, the idea of pausing can feel like self-betrayal. But Carl Jung reminded us, who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. And that awakening doesn't begin through striving. It begins the moment you surrender. Stop running and allow your inner world to rise to the surface. When you've been doing too much, when your days are spent fixing, chasing, managing, and controlling, there comes a moment when your spirit begins to fracture, not because you're not enough, but because you're doing too much of what disconnects you from your soul. Stillness brings discomfort because it opens the door to the shadow. And the shadow isn't evil. It's simply the parts of you that have been repressed, rejected, or forgotten. It's the sadness you never had time to feel, the anger you were taught to suppress, the dreams you shelved in the name of survival. When you finally pause, those parts come knocking, not to destroy you, but to be reintegrated. Jung taught that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The pain you feel in stillness is not an error. It's a signal that you're ready to heal. You're no longer numbing. You're no longer escaping. You're finally witnessing. And witnessing is the soul's first language. Healing begins not when you fix your inner wounds, but when you allow yourself to sit with them without judgment. When you hold your own heart with compassion instead of criticism, integration begins to unfold naturally. You stop treating your emotions as problems and begin to see them as messengers. That moment of presence is when the soul begins to return home. And the more you stay present with what arises, the more you realize that you were never broken, only buried. The paradox is that when you stop doing, you start becoming. You begin to sense the subtle intelligence of your soul guiding you toward wholeness, not through effort, but through surrender. The shadow becomes your teacher, not your enemy. The chaos softens. And in that sacred stillness, you discover that peace was never something to be earned. It was something waiting beneath the noise all along. You realize that letting go is not about giving up, but about giving in to the deeper rhythm of your own truth. Every time you pause, breathe, and choose to be present with what is, you reclaim a piece of yourself. You retrieve the energy you once scattered, trying to be everything to everyone. You remember that your worth is not tied to how much you accomplish, but how deeply you connect with your truth, your heart, your soul. This isn't spiritual bypassing. This is spiritual returning. The soul does not ask you to do more. It asks you to feel more, to trust more, and to surrender the illusion that you are only valuable when you're producing, fixing, or pleasing. So the next time stillness scares you, don't run. Stay. Listen. Let your pain speak. Let your past rise. Let your emotions guide you inward. Because when you finally let go, you don't fall apart, you fall into alignment. And that is when your soul, long silenced by the noise of doing, begins to sing. 5. Synchronicity arises in surrender. Carl Jung's concept of synchronicity, those deeply meaningful coincidences that seem to carry a message from the universe, doesn't arise when we're pushing, striving, or clinging to control. It shows up when we finally pause, surrender, and allow life to flow from the soul rather than the ego. You may have been taught that success only comes through constant effort, but Jung's spiritual insight turns that belief on its head. The more you try to manipulate outcomes and micromanage every detail of your journey, the more resistance you create. Synchronicity isn't attracted to force. It's magnetized by inner alignment. When your soul is at peace, when you're no longer chasing, life mirrors that calmness back to you in symbolic, mysterious, and often miraculous ways. Just think of the moments when, out of nowhere, the right person calls, the perfect opportunity arises, or you stumble across a message that speaks directly to what you needed most. That's not random. It's a response to your surrender. Carl Jung believed that the soul doesn't communicate through noise or control, but through symbols, dreams, emotions, and silence. One woman I spoke with had spent years obsessing over manifesting her dream career, pouring her energy into vision boards, cold calls, and productivity hacks. Nothing seemed to work. But when she burned out and finally surrendered, choosing instead to heal, meditate, and simply live, the phone rang with an unexpected job offer from a company she had long forgotten she applied to. It wasn't just any job, it aligned with her purpose, her passions, and her values. That's how synchronicity works. It steps in the moment we step back. When we stop interfering with the natural flow of things, the spiritual current begins to carry us. The soul thrives not in tension, but in trust. Surrender doesn't mean giving up. It means giving space for a higher intelligence to move. Carl Jung reminds us that the unconscious mind, the deeper layers of the psyche, are always communicating with us, but we have to be quiet enough to listen. And when we do, life responds not through logic, but through serendipity, symbols, and spiritual nudges that guide us in the right direction. So if you've been doing too much, overthinking, overextending, overplanning, it might be time to do the most radical thing of all. Nothing. Step into stillness. Listen, align, and trust that the soul already knows the way. If this message resonated with your soul, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced synchronicity after letting go? Let's explore the mystery of alignment together. 6. Trusting the unconscious is a radical act. Trusting the unconscious is not just a concept, it is a deeply spiritual invitation to step away from the constant need to control and finally surrender to something greater than your intellect. Carl Jung taught us that the unconscious isn't chaos. It's a vast, mysterious intelligence that holds more wisdom than the conscious mind could ever access. It speaks in symbols, in dreams, in fleeting moments of intuition, and yet, most people never hear its messages because they're too busy doing, always chasing. In a world where productivity is praised and stillness is mistaken for laziness, the soul is often silenced beneath the noise of constant motion. You rush from task to task, convinced that more action will bring clarity or safety, but in doing so, you disconnect from the very part of yourself that knows the truth, the spiritual truth. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." That is the danger of constant doing. You become a stranger to your own soul and mistake the external world as the only source of meaning. When you slow down, truly slow down, you begin to notice the subtle ways your inner life has been trying to speak to you all along. That anxious feeling in your chest wasn't just stress, it was your soul crying out for realignment. That recurring dream wasn't random. It was a message from your deeper self, begging you to pay attention. The unconscious does not reveal itself through force. It unfolds through presence. You cannot schedule a breakthrough. You cannot demand revelation. You must create the space for it to arrive. And that space is born out of humility, out of the willingness to stop pushing and simply listen. In today's world, that act of surrender is radical. It means rejecting the hustle, if only for a moment, and choosing instead to sit with the unknown, to trust that not knowing is a form of wisdom. Surrender is often misunderstood as weakness, but it's actually a fierce kind of strength. It's the spiritual power of letting go, not because you failed, but because you finally realized that your soul cannot be led by force. It must be felt, followed, honored. This is why so many people feel burned out, stuck, emotionally numb, because they've been living according to the mind's agenda while ignoring the soul's longing. When you give yourself permission to stop, to breathe, to drop beneath the surface of your thoughts, you open a doorway to something sacred. The unconscious begins to rise, not as confusion, but as clarity, not as noise, but as guidance. And in that space, you may begin to realize that you've been doing too much, not because you were wrong, but because you were afraid of what silence might reveal. But the silence is not empty. It is full of truth. Jung believed that transformation begins when you stop trying to fix yourself and instead allow your true self to emerge from within. This is the spiritual essence of letting go. It is not the absence of responsibility, but the presence of deep trust. Trust in your inner voice. Trust in the timing of your life. Trust in the divine unfolding that doesn't need your interference, only your awareness. And in that awareness, you'll find that everything you've been chasing already lives inside you waiting, not to be earned through effort, but remembered through stillness. 7. Transformation requires patience, not pressure. Transformation is not an event, It's a soul's unfolding, a sacred process that Carl Jung likened to alchemy, where lead is not turned into gold in a single moment, but through gradual, often invisible phases. In a world that glorifies instant gratification and measurable progress, this truth can feel deeply unsettling, especially if you're used to achieving, fixing, and controlling every outcome. But spiritual wisdom reminds us that real change is not born from pressure. It blossoms from patience. When you finally stop pushing yourself to transform on someone else's timeline, or even your own ego's demands, you begin to align with the deeper rhythm of your soul. Jung believed that transformation occurs in the unconscious first, not in the visible world of doing, but in the quiet realm of being. When you resist the urge to escape discomfort or slap solutions on your emotional wounds, you actually make space for your inner world to reorganize itself organically. It's in that space where you don't have all the answers, where you feel uncertain, raw, even lost, that your true growth begins to take root. As Jung once said, we do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This means that the soul doesn't evolve by bypassing pain or skipping steps. It grows stronger each time you choose to stay, breathe, and listen within. Think of it like winter slowly giving way to spring, not because someone forced it to, but because nature follows a sacred rhythm that cannot be rushed. The same is true for you. When you stop treating transformation as a to-do list and start honoring it as a spiritual unfolding, everything changes not outwardly at first, but inwardly, where the most important shifts happen. You may find that what once felt like stagnation was actually sacred stillness, and what looked like delay was your soul catching up with the life you were meant to live. This process demands trust, not in outcomes, but in the intelligence of the soul itself, which knows exactly when to release, when to rest, and when to rise. The more you pressure yourself to figure it all out, the more you delay the very healing that needs to occur in stillness. But when you surrender, when you soften your grip, sit in uncertainty, and allow your inner world to breathe, you invite the divine to participate in your evolution. And that is when transformation stops being something you try to do and becomes something you allow to happen through you. If you're still here with us, drop a comment below saying, "I'm trusting the process." Your presence matters, and your feedback helps us grow together on this path of transformation. 8. Doing nothing is a sacred practice. Carl Jung believed that doing nothing, when practiced with awareness, is not a waste of time, but a sacred act of spiritual return. In a world that worships busyness and equates self-worth with output, the simple act of stillness becomes radical. It is in the quiet, when we stop performing and producing, that the ego begins to dissolve and the soul starts to rise. You stop identifying with roles, achievements, or how others perceive you, and begin to recognize the quiet power of your own presence. You come to understand that your worth isn't something you earn, it's something you remember. Jung saw this as a process of spiritual purification, where the noise of the external world fades and the truth of your inner world is finally heard. The more you strip away the unnecessary doing, the more you meet the raw, unfiltered essence of who you really are. Take, for example, a woman named Sarah, successful by all conventional standards, yet quietly unraveling inside. She had spent years chasing productivity, achievements, and validation, believing they would fill the void. But they never did. One day, overwhelmed and exhausted, she chose to unplug completely and spend 3 days in silence. No phone, no emails, no obligations, just the unfamiliar sound of her own breath. At first, the stillness terrified her, but then came the tears. Not from pain, but from the shock of feeling herself for the first time in years. In doing nothing, she realized she hadn't lost herself. She had simply been too busy to hear her soul whispering beneath the noise. That weekend didn't fix her life, but it gave her something far more valuable: awareness. Awareness that she didn't need to prove her worth. She just needed to return to it. Carl Jung taught that the soul doesn't scream for your attention. It waits. It doesn't need you to achieve or perform to be worthy of your own love. In fact, the more you push, strive, and control, the more disconnected you become from what truly matters. Letting go, therefore, is not giving up. It's waking up. When you surrender the need to control every outcome, you begin to trust the natural unfolding of life. You begin to see that you are not behind or broken. You are simply being asked to rest in your being. In that sacred pause, creativity returns, clarity rises, emotional wounds begin to mend, because the soul, as Jung said, speaks in silence, symbols, and dreams, not in metrics, deadlines, or perfection. And when you finally stop doing, you begin to remember that peace was never something to chase. It was always something to allow. So if you're exhausted from carrying too much, maybe it's time to stop. Not because you failed, but because your soul is asking you to. Let your healing begin in the stillness. Let your clarity be born in the quiet. Because according to Carl Jung, doing nothing isn't a break from life. It's where life truly begins. 9. The soul speaks in stillness, not striving. When you stop striving, chasing, fixing, or performing for the world, something extraordinary begins to happen. Your true self slowly rises from the depths of your being. Carl Jung understood this truth when he said, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." The soul doesn't emerge through noise, urgency, or effort. It awakens through stillness, through the sacred pause where the unconscious finally breathes, and the spiritual dimension of your being can begin to speak. We've been conditioned to believe that the more we do, the more worthy we become. But this is the great illusion. In reality, the deepest transformation begins not in effort, but in allowing. The moment you stop trying to be someone for others and start resting in your essence, your entire frequency changes. Stillness is not a void. It's a sacred space where clarity begins, where your intuition whispers, and where your past wounds begin to unravel in the quiet embrace of presence. In that spiritual silence, you begin to hear the truth that was buried under years of noise and conditioning. The soul doesn't rush. It doesn't scream. It remembers. And in that remembering, you realize you were never broken, only buried beneath layers of survival patterns, people-pleasing, and unconscious striving. Letting go isn't giving up. It's waking up. It's returning to a frequency that feels like peace without needing proof, love without performance, and worth without achievement. The ego fears this stillness because it cannot control it. But the soul flourishes in it because this is where it finds God, source, spirit, whatever you choose to call the sacred. When you finally stop, you don't collapse, you expand. You don't fade, you illuminate. And suddenly, you're no longer chasing your path. You're walking it with presence, with grace, and with a quiet kind of power that doesn't need to be explained to be felt. You don't need to be seen by the world to know who you are. The soul doesn't need an audience. It only needs alignment. Letting go of the need to constantly do is one of the most spiritual acts of rebellion in a world addicted to noise. It's a radical return to the self, a remembrance that you are already whole, already enough, already in rhythm with the greater unfolding. And when you truly understand this, you stop looking for signs and start becoming one. The moment you release the grip of control, you open your hands to receive everything that was meant for you all along. Not because you chased it, but because you aligned with it. And that is where your soul begins to lead. To affirm your devotion to inner stillness, comment below, "I choose stillness." Let this be your quiet vow to listen more deeply, trust your soul, and inspire others to do the same. Thank you for joining us on this journey into Carl Jung's powerful insight. That true transformation doesn't come from doing more, but from learning to let go. If today's message helped you pause, reflect, or feel more aligned with your soul's deeper rhythm, we invite you to become part of our growing community. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom, and make sure to turn on the notification bell so you never miss a moment of clarity, healing, and awakening in our future videos. Let go and let your soul lead.